You're listening to the Play It Brave podcast. Join Darcy for a wild rummage around in her wit and wisdom. She's a photographer, an educator, and a marketing ninja. Each week, she's going to be teaching you all about creating a life full of mindset, money, and marketing miracles. Listen to real-world experiences and surefire strategies from expert guests, all to keep you focused on your path to success. Think less hand-holding or fist bumps. So stop playing safe. It's time to start playing it brave. Here's your host, Darcy Benincosa.
On today's episode of the Play It Brave podcast, we have the incredible Jeremy Slate, who is a creator of his own kick-ass podcast called Create Your Own Life Podcast. And you help people really show up in podcast form and learn how to create PR, how to create an audience. You have interviewed some of my incredible favorites like Seth Godin and Robert Greene. And you've been featured in countless magazines and just numerous places where you really craft the art of storytelling. One thing you and I have in common is that we have both studied at Oxford University. My degree is in literature. Your degree is in literature. So I think we already understand the power of storytelling.
Oh my gosh. And it's funny, you talk about the publications I've been in. You have way more logos on your website than I do, lady. So come on now. You're a rock star in your own right.
All photos. Yes, totally. But I have a small but mighty podcast. I have a dedicated set of listeners. It's so great to show up every week in their ears. And I think a lot of people have a lot to say, but they get really nervous about, is there space for me? How will I grow? They see all these, you have an impressive over 2.5 million downloads. And how do you even come to get to that place? So one, I know you must be really good with people and listening to people and understanding people.
Well, I guess that's part of it, but also in some ways, I'm too dumb to realize that, if you put in a lot of action, it's going to get your results as well. So that's also part of it is, and I was talking to somebody about this today. I'm a deep work type of person, meaning I get on when I launched my show, I sent 100 individual hand typed emails to people I really admired. And I spent 8.5 hours, writing those emails. I didn't have to go to the bathroom or eat or anything like that. So it's at the same time, I've also really concentrated on the projects I've been doing to the point of, I guess, almost insanity in some ways.
So I love it. Did you create a couple of episodes and then write these emails to have people listen? Or what was your communication in the email? What were you adding value? How were you talking to them?
So I guess to back it up then, I had a podcast before my current one, but it didn't really go very well. It was called Rock Your Life, and I didn't do any trademark research or anything like that. And I found out somebody already had the name, so I changed it to Rock Your Life, which, being somebody highly educated, it looks like I couldn't spell, which is really bad. It just became, I got rid of the Y and the O and it was Rock Your Life. I had done a couple interviews with people that I knew pretty well because I wasn't great on a mic. I wasn't excited about being in front of people. So I just grabbed some of my friends that have been highly successful. One of them had the largest real estate brokerage of a ranch in the U.S., which is very cool. So, when you position that the right way, it sounds interesting. And I also have a friend that's bringing solar energy to different parts of Africa. So he's doing some really cool stuff there as well. So I sat down with both of these guys and we went over, their businesses and stuff like that. And I launched this first podcast and those episodes are part of it. Didn't really do so well. But what I did is when I launched the second one, I already had these 2 or 3 in the can. I also had a friend, Stephen Baker, that used to play for the Giants. So I had these 3 or 4 episodes in the can. So when I launched, I could say I have interviewed, quote unquote, these people. And then as I was reaching out to guests and I started getting yeses, that changed to interviewed the following people and also scheduled the following people. So I hadn't quite interviewed them yet, but it's once again how you position it. And I also really paid attention to, the show is called Create Your Own Life. It comes from a conversation I had with my dad where after I'd quit my teaching job, which I'd spent a lot of time trying to get, he goes, well, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I want to create my own life. And he goes, good luck with that, buddy. So when I wrote these emails, I really talked about, that passion and where that came from and why I was uniquely reaching out to this person. So it was something that evolved as more people said yes, as the copy kind of changed for each individual person. So, that's kind of what it looked like, I guess.
So you were a school teacher for a while and
Yes.
then got disenchanted. Did you know I was too? 14 years.
Mhm. I wouldn't say disenchanted. I guess so. Here's the thing. Like
What happened? What was your journey out of teaching?
I don't have an education background, first of all. So like I didn't have like classroom management or anything like that. I was just somebody that went to school for a really long time and had good
Did they
grades.
eat you alive?
Oh, they ate me alive. And then, so this was in year 2, my mom ended up having like a really, really bad stroke. And I ended up having to, get up at 4:30 in the morning, help her get dressed in the morning and stuff like that. And I was just miserable going to work every day and everything like this. So my wife was introduced to a network marketing opportunity, which I didn't know what that was. So I thought I was going to be like a bazillionaire by the end of the week. It didn't happen like that. But it was kind of that thing that was enough to get me off my duff and convince me to just do something else. And a bunch of different things led me to the podcast. It wasn't that it, wasn't exactly the career for me. It just kind of ate me up because I wasn't prepared for it. It was rough.
Yeah. So how did the podcast sort of seem like this is my route? Was there any indication? Do you just really love I know you love talking to people and hearing their stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess part of that is I'm a student of history, so I really enjoy learning about people that have done really big things. It's just very, very interesting to me. So that's part of it. I just always enjoyed those stories. The other part of it is I've been a podcast listener since like 2006 when it was
right
like
when they first started.
Yeah, there was like a lot of audiobooks in the public domain and stuff like that. So I'd listen to like, Jason and the Argonauts or something like that as a podcast. And there's also another show I've listened to, it's at 1,200 episodes or something like that now, but since the beginning, it's called the No Agenda Show. It's hosted by Adam Curry that used to be an MTV VJ back in the day, and John Dvorak from PC Mag, and they actually just take a look at the news and they kind of make fun of it, and it's very, very interesting. So I've listened to that show for, over 10 years, and I just really loved podcasts. So I was like, okay, I listen to these guys, and they're not on camera or anything because I don't like being on camera initially. So if I do a podcast, I can just kind of talk to people behind a mic. Nobody has to see me. It's not intimidating. It is what it is. And it was something that allowed me to get started after I had failed at, network marketing, selling life insurance, selling products on Amazon, and eventually taught myself how to write website code from internet research and had started working at a friend's web design firm. So the podcast was kind of just a hobby to be an outlet, honestly.
That's how a lot of really good things start, is people don't put a lot of expectation or pressure.
Yep.
They just start with a hobby. That's how my photography grew. And then it turns into something so incredible. You didn't even see it coming. So you've been listening to podcasts for a long time. What are some of the big key indicators that a podcast is going to be successful? Because like everybody, I'll see some and they lasted 12 episodes, then they're done. And they usually have the name I wanted. I'm like, darn it, they have such a great name and they're not even active anymore, And then there are people, like you said, who have been around on their 1200th episode. Can you put into words any things that you've seen that the people who stick around, what they're doing that works?
Well, I guess there's kind of two classes of that as well. Because like I know you and I both have interview shows, but at the same time, a lot of the shows I listen to are like story driven. Like there's a great show called We're Live that I listen to. There's another one called Tannis. The Black Tapes is another great one. Lore is another great podcast I enjoy. And these are all story driven podcasts. So they're a little bit different. So for something like that, it's good delivery. It's well-written scripts. It's the right kind of use of sounds and stuff like that in the background to make it interesting, the right backtrack. So that's kind of the one half of it, because I love shows like that. And that's what I spend a lot of my time doing other than work. The other part of it, if you're looking at it from an interview-driven side, it's not trying to rip off every single person out there. I feel like there's 900,000 podcasts out there. I feel like 250,000 of them are trying to be John Lee Dumas. Like it's kind of ridiculous at this point.
Yeah.
Like you have to have your own individual unique message and reason for doing it. And also realize that the podcast itself can be used as a really great networking tool like it was for me initially, but also it should be promoting your brand. You're not kind of creating it as something that it's like, all right, so we're going to put it together. And there was a South Park episode way back in the day that talked about the magical internet money. So people think they're going to make the magical internet money when they start their podcast. And that's just not how it is. 1/2 of 1% are going to be people that make the big money on their show. So you have to realize this has got to be something that is, number one, a creative piece for you. Number two, different than everybody else out there. And then number three, it positions something else you're already doing or helps you to go in a different direction. You know what I mean? Like, you can't think this is just, we're going to create this podcast, we're going to get up the download numbers, and we're going to start selling some advertising. It's going to be awesome. Like, it's just not like that.
Yeah, no, trust me. I know, because I am going on year 2 of mine, and it definitely is not a moneymaker.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm on the fence, even though I have such a great audience. Is it worth my time? Should I keep doing this? Is everybody else already doing this? What do you speak to when people say that? Like, you let your first one die and then you rebirthed a new one. Have you seen people do things like that where they started one, they know they're a good host, and then they just decide, cut that one, we're going to launch something that has something different or new?
You have me laughing though, because my first podcast was like trash. It was like so bad. It was like literally like I didn't have a microphone. It was me at my old, like, back in the day, iBook G4. Like, it wasn't even like a MacBook. So the miking was horrible. I was very focused on like being like life coachy, because I just come out of this like bunch of businesses that didn't work realm. So like I didn't have any like real life experience yet. So it just wasn't good in that way. And number 2, like, I've done almost over 700 interviews at this point. I didn't feel good about doing an interview until I got to like 250, 200, somewhere around there, because the more conversations you have, the more you look for pauses, the more you notice when somebody ends their sentence and you ask them for more. You learn how to, like, honestly, one of the best skills is learning a great follow-up question, because follow-up questions, there's absolute gold there. And I think that's why a lot of times if you see press conferences, reporters are like, hold on, I had a follow-up. And a lot of times you get so much great information in that follow-up question. So those are things that I learned, as I was going through. So I think if you're somebody that's really looking to create something awesome and something that's sticking around, work on your chops, work on really getting good at this. The thing that I've really done to do that is I've picked a lot of, famous reporters to look at. I've watched tape of Walter Cronkite. I've watched a lot of Larry King. I've, listened to Susie Orman. I've done a lot of different stuff to learn people that I think do great interviews, and kind of see how they ask things, how they do different things. And I think once you get good at that, you start to create some really great content. And the more you do it, then you also gain a skill that I try to do as well. And, being somebody from literature, you understand this. You learn to shift your viewpoint, right? Like, you learn to ask questions from the viewpoint of the person that's listening to you. So it kind of leads you through a great conversation where you're actually answering the questions that the people that are listening to you want to hear. Like, not just things that you and I want to know because we're the person interviewing them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that interview process, I didn't do interviews my first year of the podcast. I basically was just sharing marketing knowledge, because I was recording it at 1 a.m. in my bedroom, no video, anything like that. I just wanted to get things out, and that was a good start. But I think as I've added the guests and I've learned how to interview a little bit better, it's really upped the ante. So who's someone you interviewed that you couldn't believe they said yes, and you were just like hope and a prayer, sent this email out, and they came back with a yes, and you were just like, score?
I guess there's probably 2 of them, and it's because I'm a closet racing fan. I don't really like promote it out there like, hey, I love racing. It's awesome. Danica Patrick, I actually met her at an event in New York City. Super cool person. We spent an hour together doing an interview. That was great. I was just shocked. And I think another one would be Elio Castroneves, who's one of only 4 people to win the Indy 500 3 times.
Wow.
So it was like a really big deal. And I just remember, like, my dad is a huge like sports person. So I would like call my dad and be like, Dad, you're never going to believe who I just talked to. And so it's kind of that part of it. When I can call my dad, it's popular culture enough, because he's not very popular culture, to understand like, what I just did here and how cool that is.
And did they say yes did you email them, or had you made an in-person connection?
So I had met Danica at a Business Insider event. Well, actually, I'd met her publicist. And then I had worked through her publicist to get something set up. Elio Castroneves, I couldn't find a great email for them. So I actually I knew he raced for Penske Racing at that point in time, Roger Penske's team. So I went to the Penske trucking website. I found that on their trucking website, they had a link to the racing site, which had a media page. And there I pitched the PR person, who was very, very cool and willing to hop on the phone with me and work it out.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I did something similar. I was trying to get in touch with Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, the musician.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I got permission to use one of their songs through their photographer who I stalked on Instagram, contacted her, begged her to give me their contact information, showed her what I was trying to promote, which was, one thing that really made my photography career was I was one of the first photographers down on the scene during same-sex marriage when it got approved. Utah was the first state. People always forget that.
That's surprising, Utah.
It is. I know, but they were the first state to approve it. And I ran down and took a bunch of photos and got Ryan. I still have the email from Ryan Lewis, but I tracked them down. Like when there's a will, there is a way. And the way that I got that, it sounds so similar to you, but that's what I think when you have the passion and who would make a good guest and you really reach out. I'm so in awe of you just spending that 8.5 hours writing those emails, because I think a lot of people think if I build it, they'll come.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to build it and then I have to do a lot of
And that's not true. You gotta create it. You know what I mean? You have to create it. And if you're not like what can you expect? And sometimes too, like for the right person, you kind of go out of your way to like make the interview work. Like I'm a huge Matisyahu fan. He is one of my favorite reggae performers, like super awesome. So I let him do the interview on Skype while he was in his car. Like sometimes you do certain things to make it work, and to just really get to ask that person you really admire, what makes them, tick, what makes them do what they do, because you want to share it with other people.
Yeah, exactly. And people who are top performers, which is who you specialize in, everyone that you're mentioning has just had such incredible accolades. They're usually on the road. They need to take an interview in their car. They need you to come to them, and we have to be willing to do that. So one of the things that you're genius at is really helping people, especially podcasts, compete like a big brand, but not spend like a big brand. Can you dive into some of your juicy details about that?
Yeah. Can I just tell you one more story on the last part too? Because this is really fun. I'm a huge fan of a band called Jack's Mannequin. I don't know if you heard of it.
I have not, but I'm like a classical music listener, so I'm cool. Really nerdy.
Okay, so it's like kind of like Billy Joel mixed with Beatles music almost. But his publicist said to me, the guy's name is Andrew McMahon. He goes, Andrew's at a tour stop. He has no internet. He has no Wi-Fi, but he's totally willing to do the interview. I'm like, I can have him call into the Zoom phone line and we can do it that way. So like sometimes where there's a will, there's a way, when you're like really excited to really learn from somebody.
Yeah.
But anyway, you're talking about competing like a big brand. Is that where you want to go with that?
Absolutely. Like,
okay, cool.
You're showing us such great information about being persistent, but not being annoying, making things work. And I know people get so much passion and then they put so much into it and then it still doesn't take off as they want. So I'm curious, like, what are some of your tactics for us smaller podcasts to make a bigger impact?
Well, and I think it's not just podcasts either. It's like in anything you're doing. One of my favorite places to start is what I call your small pond, because everybody has one and they just don't realize it. Everybody wants to get the Forbes, the Inc., the Sports Illustrated, which you've been in, a lot of these really cool places, which are awesome. And eventually you can get there, but they kind of cut out their power center where they started, right? Like they forget about the town they're from. They forget about their university. They forget about all these different areas. So I tell people, find out what your small pond is and start building a media page on your site doing that. So I grew up in a small town. It's 5/8 of a mile in size, like doesn't have a grocery store. Like nothing happens there. And I'm like one of a few people that actually go to college from there, but like nothing really happens there. So there's a small newspaper that goes to everybody's house on a Thursday in the mail. So everybody in 2 counties around there gets it and nothing happens. So when I write a press release about something I'm doing and send it in, they print it in their print edition, but also in their online edition as well. So I'm getting a backlink and it hits Google News because it's also a news source. So you should start finding out what some of these small local places are that care about you. Like I went to Peru in 2015 for Rotary. Rotary does a lot of press stuff. So you want to find out what these small groups are and start doing press releases and being in their magazines and stuff like that. And it helps you to build a portfolio of press. So that's kind of one place you want to start. Do you want to say something? Yeah,
I do. So portfolio of press, would it be like, let's say, for photography, would it be talking about a photo project coming out, or what kind of press should a photographer or an artist? I know as a drama teacher, I used to do the same thing. I taught in Park City High School, and there was a little newspaper called Park Record, and I made sure the 3 weeks before the musical opened, we were featured every week. I would take a different turn on the article, and like they would feature us front page, and people would come and the shows would sell out. As a photographer, do you have any off the top, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
no. So I guess the way to think about it, and it's funny because like we've been talking about here, a lot of this stuff is how you position it, right? Like I was talking about interviews scheduled, not done, but it's how you position it because you're using the name or using whatever it is. So it could be like for me in the podcasting space, when I hit 50,000 downloads, that's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but to people outside of podcasts, like, wow, that's a lot of things. So I wrote an article about, what that was, what the milestone was, what went into that. You could, if you're a photographer, maybe there's a special, type of camera you use and a special reason you use it and, how it's kind of affected your work. Or there's a new location you're shooting at that's been exclusive. Like when you went to Utah and you were the first one on the scene there, that's very exclusive and interesting. So you want to find out what's newsworthy about what you're doing. And it's just the way you tell it, because I think I've talked to a lot of different people about this. Like I had a doctor say to me one time, hey, your services sound great, but I'll just wait until I get successful that people come back around and start, asking to interview me. Most of the time, it doesn't work like that. You have to be willing to toot your own horn, but in the way of what is newsworthy or interesting about what I'm doing. Have you achieved a milestone? Is there a certain holiday that affects you? Is there, like a women's owned business organization? That's a big deal as well. So there's all these different things. Maybe you're doing something now for the Paycheck Protection Program that has to do with your business. So there's always different ways you can position how you're telling the story so that it makes sense for the media, so that they're interested. Like they're just not interested in XYZ business exists. It's just not interesting. But it's how are you going to position it and tell the story in such a way that somebody's going to want to know more and want to run that story?
One of the things that I do to see what's trending, what could I create content about, is I go to TikTok and I look what's trending. And then I'm like, okay, how can I spin what's trending on TikTok? Some of the more approachable topics there, and really create something, because trends are so important. What's being talked about is so important. And the thing that people forget all the time is that these channels need content and they need relevant content. So like you teach a lot about how you can basically do your own PR by just checking out what's trending and figure out how you can spin it in a way that serves others and helps your own business. Do you have any other PR tips that you?
Well, I feel like I'm old too, because my trending topics I'm always checking on Twitter. Like that's kind of where I'm looking. I'm like, hey, what's happening on Twitter? Which sometimes can be a cesspool, but we won't go there. But there's another thing to think about as well. I learned a really great trick from my friend Dennis Yu that has a company called Blitz Metrics, and they teach it's called the $1 a day advertising strategy. So like once you have one of these pieces of press, like we talked about, you can actually set up different $1 a day budget ads. So what you mean, you set it up to be run for 30 days, whatever it may be, at $1 budget a day, and you set up a Facebook pixel on your website. So it's people that have already seen you, familiar with you, whatever it may be, and you target that advertising at them. So you're not hitting a really big audience, but it's very targeted. So that dollar is going to take you a very long way, because they're going to check out that piece of press. You're relevant to them. It's very interesting. So it's something that's going to help you get more notoriety and interest for people that have already checked you out. Then another ad set you're going to set up is also another ad to try and get you more press, because yes, we want to show how you're relevant to people that have already seen you, and we want to create more trust with them. But the other ad set you want to do is you want to set ads at people that work at different like news organizations, like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, whatever they may be, things that are relevant to your area. You do another $1 a day budget, and you run that same piece of press you were featured in with a little bit of copy about why it's interesting and why it's, whatever it may be. And then you run it at that targeting, and you can start getting some interest from people that, when the time comes and they need a source on that, they may come back around and interview you about that. So you can do a really small budget advertising that can also create a really big return for you as well.
I love that because I think that a lot of people think Facebook ads have to be really complicated or you have to spend, I was at an event recently and they said, if you're not spending $1,000 a day, you're not in the game. And
I feel like you and I were at the same event because I was like, you got to be kidding me, dude.
No, I just thought, really? That's what it's really going to come down to? Like, right. I don't want to do that. I love being scrappy. I love figuring out these little tricks that really can bring in fast growth without a big budget. Mm-hmm. And yeah, eventually you can do big budget things too.
Yeah, sure.
But I think this is so smart. So tell me about the first time you got featured in Forbes. What was your route? What was the path you took to get that?
Oh gosh, I was on a podcast that was actually featured to Forbes.
Okay.
I had I had Kevin Cruz from the Lead X podcast, and I had met an event. Super cool dude, and he interviewed me for his podcast, and it came out as a Forbes feature, which was really cool.
Okay.
So that was a really awesome thing, and I just remember like sending it to my parents, and they're like, "Wait, what? You were in Forbes, huh?" It's kind of unfathomable to my parents that were like kind of like panicking every day and asking me like, "Hey, are you making enough money? Are you doing okay? Like, are you doing okay?" I'm like, "Dad, I don't want to be rude, but I kind of make more money than you. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, don't worry about me. I'm doing fine." But it was kind of like a really nice, in certain ways, like a really nice showing that, hey, like what I'm doing is actually paying fruit. And I know last year for 2019, Inc. actually ran a list where I was their number one podcast to listen to for 2019, which was super, super cool. And it happened that the writer of the article for Inc. was actually a listener to my show. So that was like it came out of nowhere. And I got a Google News alert, which if your audience doesn't have that set up, Google News Alerts set up an alert for your name in quotation marks. So that anytime you hit the media, you get an email. So I got an email that my name was mentioned in an article. I'm like, what was I in? And I saw this list. I'm like, wow, that's incredible. So at the same time, like what you're doing can also pay you back as well to help enhance your credibility too.
It's so nice. I set up a Google News alert, I don't know, 5 years ago or something. And it's really awesome when you get an unexpected alert. You're like, where was I mentioned? How can I use this? It's just super exciting. And I think we come from a generation of parents who just want us to be so secure, but they do not understand the way the entrepreneurship has moved. My parents do not have any clue what I do. They're always very concerned, but I have made way more money than they ever had in their lives. And they just can't wrap their heads around that I don't go to a 9-to-5 job. I love parents.
It's so funny because my dad's somebody that like his goal was to play professional baseball, and he did for a little bit, but he had some arthritis and stuff younger that kind of slowed him down from that. So he started working at the machine shop at a company. Then he worked up to the next level and the next level. And now 50 years later, he's the VP of the company. So he thinks that's kind of the path you take. And it's well done for him, but it just doesn't work like that anymore. I think I read an article that said the average millennial by the time they retire is going to have had 12 jobs. Mm-hmm. It's just a very different world that we live in now.
Yeah, it really is. And I love it. As somebody who has wanted to experience 12 different lifetimes and live 12 different stories, I'm like, bring it on. What's my next job? I love changing it up. So you just have so much knowledge from all the people that you've interviewed. You get to soak it all in. What's a story or a business that you remember just hearing about and loving the inspiration that came from them? Just as an idea of how to make it as an entrepreneur. Do you have any good examples?
The one that's coming to mind for me is Kara Golden. She started a company called Hint Water. She used to be in the C-suite at AOL Time Warner. And she was making, I forget the concept of why she was making, but basically she started making this flavored water in her home, which was just with pieces of fruit in it. And her friends were all like, oh, this is incredible. People would buy this. She's like, oh, nobody's going to buy my water. And she actually ended up creating this company. And the day she was scheduled for a C-section, she was hauling crates of water to Whole Foods herself, getting it put on the shelf, and then she went to the hospital to have her baby and have her scheduled C-section. She's on FaceTime with the guy at Whole Foods right after her child's born, and he's telling her, hey, all your water sold out, and she's trying to handle getting more water, and she just had a baby within the last 12 hours. So to me, that was one of the most impressive things I'd ever heard, because I'm like, I've never had a baby before. My wife has, but I could imagine you don't want to do a whole lot before and after that. So that's pretty incredible.
That is Superwoman right there. Right. Wonder Woman. But I love her gumption. You know, I remember reading about when Sarah Blakely first started Spanx, and she would go into the stores where it was featured and she would change up the way they were positioning it. She would move hers up to the top. She would like make sure that Spanx was within eyesight of anyone who was coming around to the, you know, undergarment, circle thing. So yeah, I love people who just are so passionate about what they're creating, that they are invested, you know, they're just invested. And that's what you're really talking about with these tips of PR, writing the emails, you know, starting the podcast. You've got to be invested in what you're creating. And it feels like you're really invested. It also feels like you just have a super fun time.
Yeah.
I like it.
Well, and also like the same thing about like that story about Kara. I guess the part about it that's even crazier, like saying invested. Everybody had told her no to selling her water product. So she went to her local Whole Foods and she goes, "Can I give you a bunch of it in consignment?" And this is San Francisco. And they're like, "Yeah, you can put it in our store and hopefully people buy it." And that was why she was on FaceTime with the guy. She's like, "I don't know why people bought all your water." So it's like when you're so invested and willing to make it happen, like you'll just find a way.
Yeah. Sometimes when you're a trailblazer, you're going to get a lot of no's.
Yeah.
People aren't going to get it. And now I bet she was one of the first. And now there's so many different kinds of water all over the place. Who knew water could be such a market? But it has totally become like just $1 billion industry, probably. So to, you know, end the podcast, I would love to know, what are you doing with your life now? Like, are you just focusing on growing the podcast? Where are you finding a lot of joy? What do you think is the next few steps for entrepreneurs? I'm asking you a bunch of questions. I'm being a bad interviewer.
That's totally
right
fine.
Now. I'm going to just ask you 10 in a row.
Well, so you know, really where things went is the podcast started getting more successful and people started asking like, "Hey, can you do this for me?" So we started this like crazy business that was a podcast in a box. Like it was way too much. Like we edited your show, we booked your guests, we set up your website, we did your social media. I did all your Photoshop. Like it was like ridiculous. So I couldn't make any money on it. And my wife, who's been in PR for over 10 years now, was like, "Okay, well, if we're going to help people launch a podcast, we should get them on a bunch of podcasts and like help them tell their story in the right way." And we found out that our clients really like that. So we dropped the other 80%. And since 2016, we've run a PR firm called Command Your Brand, where we've helped people locate the right podcast, get them to position the right way, and really help them, you know, get their content out there even better than just being on podcasts. So kind of that's where it's went. So I've been in business with my wife since 2016. In 2018, I started doing a lot more speaking. So my daughter was born in October of 2018. So last year she was at an event in Italy. She was at an event in Kiev, which meant we went on a family vacation to Kiev, Bratislava, Budapest, like all these interesting places that when I was a kid, that couldn't happen. So we've really concentrated on like kind of creating this very cool life around like what we're doing and just really experiencing it. And, you know, I'm kind of bummed as the world's kind of changing quite a bit now. And we were supposed to take her to Thailand this year, which would have been a lot of fun. So that event was moved to 2021. And at the same time, like, I've been playing, dadpreneur a lot more as well, because my wife, besides being my business partner, also helps run her mom's chiropractic office, which is an essential business right now. So I have had my 1.5-year-old home with me while I'm doing a lot of this work. And, thankfully I gave her a bath and put her down for a nap before you and I were talking. So you kind of make this all work so that everything kind of just goes in the right direction.
Everybody, I don't have as many male guests on my podcast. It tends to be more female centered, but you just won us all over.
Oh, she's the cutest. Her name is Adelaide, and she's kind of just started doing like a lot of words and stuff now. So we have a pig, and his name's Sir Remington. So so she saw the pig today, and she learned to say Remy. So she's like Remy. So she's a lot of fun. I get to take her on like breaks and stuff in between working.
Kids are seriously the best. I don't know about in quarantine. I don't have any, but they outside of quarantine, I love them. Okay, so that leads me to another question. People who are growing a podcast, sometimes I've had a lot of offers from PR companies who are saying, let me help you grow your podcast. I don't know what it is about me, but I'm always very skeptical that these things are legit. So what are some of the good tried and true signs that it is time to start paying for some PR? You've done all that you can, you're making good money, so you have more money, and it's time to see if other people can help spread spread your message.
Sure.
What signs can we look for?
Well, the first thing is like, is it really your market? You know what I mean? And I think that's the biggest thing is people tend to think that everybody's their market, and it's just not the case. Like, you have to be in front of your people if you're going to make an impact. Like, we had a client before they worked for us. They were on the Oprah show, and they sell like industrial equipment. It's like, that wasn't going to work on Oprah. So like, it really has to be your people first and foremost. The other thing is, there's a few things to look at to like know that these are the right podcasts for you as well. Like, where are they ranked in the top 200 of their category in iTunes is a good thing to look for. What's their number of reviews? Like, really the baseline I see as a really great baseline is if they're around 100. Like, that's kind of the make break number to show that there's a quality podcast there. The other thing as well is like, what are the caliber of the guests they're interviewing? Because maybe they have some really awesome high quality guests, but they don't have the review number there, and that's fine. So there's a few things you should be looking for to make sure they're good in that way. But also at the same time, how you tell your story really, really matters. And that's why we look at every interview and we coach people through a process we call story, message, call to action. Your personal story, your 3 to 5 key teachable points, which we've covered today, and the action you want people to take at the end. Because I find far too often people get on a podcast and they think that, just by virtue of being on the show, it's going to create a result for you. And you actually have to tell people what to do at the end, not give them 37 different options in your grandmother's email address when you get to the end of that interview. So we really tell them that what you give away should be something that's an application of what you just taught. So whether it's a PDF or a short training or whatever it may be, don't give away an ebook. They're too big and people don't want to read them. Give away something short and easy to do that's going to help somebody get a result. So I would think if you're looking at all that, if you're doing all that and you're not seeing a result, then I would definitely take a look at who you're working with, and they're probably not the right person.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I always think of, anytime I'm getting interviewed, I think of it as if, what if I was giving a TED Talk? What is my story? What is this message? And what kind of call to action? How can I help people change a behavior, have an aha, feel like they've been productive? So what's your call to action? What do you end your podcast with?
So right now, the thing that I've been giving away the most, and I found people just really enjoyed the most, is I put together a free training that you can get if you go to commandyourbrand.com/free training. And it's 35 minutes about how to find your tribe, how to tell your story, and how to actually take that story and turn it into 2 years plus of content. And that's something that whether you want to work with us or not, you're going to walk away and just feel smarter, because I've been sucked into the black hole of trainings and I don't want to do that to anybody else. I was on a 2-hour webinar once and I was like, dear God, please cut this thing off. I don't know what I'm ever going to learn from this. So I value people's time and I want them to kind of cut the learning curve that took me 4 years to learn, and basically do it in a half an hour. So that's commandyourbrand.com/free training.
Perfect. Well, we're going to put a link up to that. And I think what you surely specialize in is helping people get a clarity on their story. And I don't care what business anyone is in, the brand needs a story. It needs a reason to connect with people. It needs to be able to microphone out their story so your tribe will find you and resonate with you and want to follow you and interact with you. And it's really our calling card is our story.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. This was full of so much information. I know you know your stuff. I love people who just know what they're doing. They're masters at it and they're willing to share. I feel like that's what it takes to really, accelerate your business is be an authority, be a master, know your stories, and serve people. And that's a piece of advice I really give people. Like, I guess just to go back to what you said about like, making it a great appearance as well. Like, don't show up as scarcity. Be willing to give it all. And if somebody really wants to work with you, they'll come out and find you. If they don't, they leave better. And that's just a great thing. Yeah, exactly. They'll always have a good opinion of your name because you've served them well. No 2-hour webinars.
That person shall be remained nameless, but I kept waiting for the content. And I was like, where was the content? Where was the content? It was like the mindset shifts I had to get to the point to buy something from them, which I didn't buy. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm a very picky buyer. If they're boring, I'm just like, no, done. I don't want to listen to you. So yeah, that's so good. Well, I'm so excited to put this podcast out. I'm excited for you to spend more time with your daughter, for you to share all your wisdom, and we will definitely link to your free training. It's a powerful training. It helps people really get clarity quickly, which is what we need to grow our brand. So thank you so much for being on the Play It Brave podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to the Play It Brave podcast. Love what you heard? Wonderful. You can shout about it in the reviews. I bet you know someone who needs a shot of self-belief. Then don't keep us a secret. If you've missed something crucial, we've got show notes for this and all past episodes over at darcybenincosa.com/Play It Brave. Thanks for tuning in, but don't forget, the world teaches you to play it safe. Stand up, stand out, and start playing it brave.